Hello everybody and welcome to the Battle of Aldie custom multiplayer game Battle Analysis. Now that the battle has been completed, I wanted to go back and discuss the battle in greater depth and look at a few key issues. So in this analysis, we're going to look at the final numbers of the game. We're going to discuss the critical decisions which were made during this battle. We're also going to discuss whether this battle was more won by the Confederates or lost by the Federals. I'm also going to include a time lapse of the battle for you to watch, and then we'll go over the different takeaways that you can get from this game. At the end of this video, if you care to watch, I'm going to get into the analytics of the battle itself and dive into the numbers for a greater understanding of what occurred during this battle. Let's begin with a look at the losses that the two armies had at the Battle of Aldie. Starting with the Federal order of battle, the Federals lost about 11,000 men east of the Bull Run Mountains. This accounts for about 75% of all their losses, which totaled just over 14,000. Schenck's division took the heaviest losses, with nearly half of his force being lost in the battle. The loss of 2,435 of Buford's men cost the Federals 1,948 points in the game. This accounts for 26% of their point total when they surrendered. Moving to the Confederate order of battle now. Jones's division never became engaged in this battle, so let's just delete their division from this chart. There we go. The rebels ended up fighting the battle with almost 20,000 fewer men than did the Yankees. The rebels fielded about 45,553 men against the Federals' 65,000. Hood's division took as many losses in terms of percentage lost in 1 hour of battle as Ewell's did for the entire day. So that kind of tells you how heavily engaged Hood's division was outside of Aldie. Confederate cavalry losses were actually pretty low, and this helped them avoid gaining points during the battle. And if you contrast this to the over 1,900 points lost by the Federals, you can see where that point difference really added up. So we're going to compare this battle to the actual battles of the Civil War. After all, I stopped my games at a certain point limit as opposed to just letting them kill each other indefinitely. So the Battle of Aldie is actually sandwiched in between the Battle of Stones River and the Battle of Shiloh in terms of total number of losses during the battle. If you look at it with percentage of losses, it's right between the Battle of Shiloh and the Battle of Antietam. So about 20% of those engaged at the Battle of Aldie ended up becoming casualties. And I think these numbers work really well, and this is why I believe point limits work. They create more realistic games where you don't just have casualty rates that are 50%, 75%, or some other crazy unrealistic number that just makes the game not as much fun. So the critical decisions of this battle. Let's begin with the Federal battle plan. The Federal plan lacked any real offensive capability, in my opinion. The initiative was with the rebels all the way from the start of this battle. And let's review the Federal plan. The idea was that they would move east of the mountains, but there was little room to maneuver, and the Federals would have the bulk of their army confined to a single road. Banks's corps would be asked to cover too much ground in the west, and they were actually ordered just to head straight to Aldie, surrendering any initiative west of the mountains. And I knew from the start that the rebels would not attack Aldie head-on, but would outflank them and encircle the Federals within the town. And that's exactly what happened. The Federal plan just was not imaginative enough. They had no ability to fight a sustained offensive battle with their dispositions. And this really limited all the options they had from the beginning of the battle all the way to the very end. A.P. Hill stays in the east. A.P. Hill could have been sent to the west once the Federals were encountered in the east along the Braddock Road. But keeping Hill in the east would give the rebels the strength they needed to push back the Federals towards Gilbert's Corner. And this was a critical decision early on. In hindsight, AP Hill definitely could have gone to the west, and perhaps they sweep around Aldie and they crush Banks's corps. It's hard to say what would have happened, but the decision to keep AP Hill in the east turned out well for the Confederates. Looking at that part of the battle here, it began around turn 8. The decision to move AP Hill to the north had to be made early in the game, as there were only 2 roads across the mountains for the Confederates to use. By turn 9, the rebels had made the decision to move AP Hill north to come in on Jackson's flank. And this was a bold decision, as it might have left Longstreet vulnerable in the west. Had the Federals had 2 corps moving offensively on that side of the battlefield, there could have been a vastly different outcome to this battle. Instead, the combined Confederate corps would drive the Federals all the way back to Gilbert's Corner, and they were the deciding factor in this battle. Sigel doesn't attack, and to me, this is the critical moment of this battle for the Federals. This, in hindsight, seems to be the only opportunity they had to regain the initiative and begin to push back the Confederate army. Sigel might have changed the entire battle had he attacked in force as he arrived on McDowell's flank. Going back to turn 20, the Federals decided to attack with Sigel, but it just never came to fruition. Sigel's forces remained too spread out at the critical moment of the battle. Nearly half of Sigel's corps remained detached north of McDowell's position. Why they were detached? Well, there were various reasons why this was. Some were building breastworks, while others were backing up parts of McDowell's corps, which it was thought were in jeopardy. But had Sigel kept his corps intact, he might have struck the rebel flank and rolled them up. And this was the best opportunity the Federals had to regain the initiative and put the Confederates back on their heels. But instead, it was the rebels who attacked in greater forces and rolled up the Federal flank. And although the Confederates were outnumbered along this part of the battlefield from beginning to end, they always seemed to have enough men at the right places and at the right times to keep the initiative and to throw back the Federals. So those are my 3 critical decisions of this battle. The Federal battle plan, which simply wasn't aggressive enough. AP Hill staying in the east, which allowed the Confederates to push north towards Gilbert's Corner. And the fact that Sigel didn't attack when he had a golden opportunity about halfway through the battle. So let's talk about, did the Confederates win this battle, or did the Federals lose this battle? Well, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. The rebels had far fewer men engaged on the battlefield than did the Federals. And the rebel plan was very aggressive, while the Federal plan was faulty from the start. The Confederates had numerous offensive plans in order to gain the initiative and to hold it from beginning to end, while the Federals, they lacked any offensive plans aside from an early march south on the Braddock Road. The Confederates utilized terrain advantages in every situation to maximize the modifiers around them, while the Federals were always being outmaneuvered and forced into poor defensive positions. The Confederates kept their cavalry losses to a minimum by using them sparingly and not in the front lines. The Federals used their cavalry in the front lines on a few occasions, and they paid a heavy price for this. So I believe a strong case could be made for either answer being correct. My opinion, though, is that the Federals lost this battle through their poor early decisions and their conservative battle plan. Also, anytime one side or the other is putting cavalry in the front lines against enemy infantry and artillery, you're almost asking to lose the battle. And I think the Federals got caught off guard early in the battle and made a few poor decisions. And as far as the points lost because of these decisions, they really added up. And this goes back to the 1,900 points lost through the cavalry branch of the Federal Army. Most of those occurred along the Braddock Road early on, as the Federal cavalry tried to stop Jackson's division moving north on that road. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. When you dismount your cavalry, they literally become the most useless units on the map. They lose all their maneuverability. They have 3/4 of the regular strength that their number shows because they have horse handlers, and they usually have inferior weapons at a range greater than 2. So the second you dismount your cavalry, they lose the one advantage that they have, which is speed. So my takeaways from this battle. You should always look to gain the initiative in any battle that you play. And the only way you can do that is through offensive actions. And that's just the reality of the Civil War and the Civil War games that we play. Never lose your ability to maneuver around the battlefield. If you are forced into a defensive position, that's perfectly fine. But you do need to find a way to make your enemy uncomfortable anytime they're around your forces. And that means having enough of a mobile force to launch counterattacks when necessary and possibly to regain the initiative. Lastly, Stonewall Jackson was right. Jackson's quote about an army being destroyed by an aggressive opponent, half their size, has to be acknowledged when looking at this battle. The Confederates were greatly outnumbered, but they were the aggressors. And although the Federals have the advantages of more artillery, more men, they simply were never able to use those advantages to their best ability. So in the end, the Confederates were more aggressive, they got the Federals back on their heels, and they just never let up. And they won the battle. What we're going to do now is do a quick time lapse of all the turns. I always find this really enjoyable. Remember, you can hit pause at any point if you want to look at any particular turn for a longer period of time. So I'm just going to be quiet here and flip through the turns so you can see the armies moving across the map. And this is where the battle ended at turn number 45. I want to thank everyone who has watched all these videos about the Battle of Aldie. I really appreciate the members playing in my customized games. I know they are very difficult, but they are also a lot of fun. And I also appreciate them allowing me to observe these games and to write these reports. As always, I just want to say that my commentary is just my opinion. It's very easy to observe and make observations from above. I always try to remember how hard it is to be in the battle and to make decisions with a heavy fog of war around you. I look forward to more of these games in the future, and I hope everyone here does as well. Alright, we're now going to have a little bit of bonus time. And you can feel free to close this window now if you don't enjoy getting into the mechanics of the game and looking at the numbers in greater depth. My feelings won't be hurt. I know it's not for everyone, but I enjoy looking at the numbers. So the following section is meant for those, just like me, who enjoy a more analytical approach to their gaming. So what we're going to do is look more at the points on a turn-by-turn basis. And in these games, I track everything. So what you're going to see in a moment is an expanded version of this graph. And for quick reference, this number here on top, highlighted in yellow, refers to the turn number of the game. Beneath that is the overall Union points gained up to that point in the game. Beneath that is the same figure except for the Confederate side. The next line shows the Union points gained during that particular turn, and the Confederate points gained during that particular turn beneath that number. Lastly, it will show you the difference between these two numbers. As an example, turn number 29, the Federals lost 100 additional points than did the Confederates, while in turn 31, the Confederates lost 35 more points than did the Federals. So, expanding this out all the way from turn number 9, when things began to really heat up, all the way to turn 45, we can see a number of trends here. To begin with, there was 45 turns played during this game. I believe that you can break down turns in one of three ways, either minor victories, major victories, or simply draws. And what I define as a minor victory for a single turn is a point gain of 100 to 249 points for one side or the other. And a 250 plus point gain is a major victory for one side or the other during a single turn. All other turns are simply draws. During this game, the Confederates had 4 turns in which they earned a minor victory, while the Federals had just 1 turn in which they earned a minor victory. As far as the 250-point major victory turns, the Confederates had 7, which is really impressive and means they were able to inflict heavy losses on the Federal Army in great chunks during individual turns. For the Federals, they didn't have any major victory turns during this battle. And if that's all the information you knew, it'd be pretty simple to tell which side won this battle. Looking at the points a little bit more in depth, you can see that the Confederates began to accumulate points very quickly early in this battle. And this was during the early fighting along the Braddock Road. Jackson's corps was attacking McDowell's corps, and also the Federals were making the mistake of putting their cavalry in the front lines. And that allowed the Confederates to gain a lot more points than they otherwise might have. The Federals then fell back towards Gilbert's Corner, and a lull occurred about midway through this battle. But then the Confederates began to pull away in points once more after the fighting renewed south of Gilbert's Corner. So are charts like these actually helpful? I believe so. They do force you to pay extra attention to things like momentum, point totals, and the life expectancy of your army. What do I mean by that? Well, if you assume an army can only really be effective up to a certain point because of mass casualties, say 40%, then these types of graphs will help you track your army's lifeblood and realize when you're approaching that point where your army will no longer be effective. I understand these charts are not for everyone, but I really enjoy them. You can also look at these same numbers along a graph, and graphs can be extremely helpful in visually determining how battles are progressing and the role that momentum plays in any battle. Well, everybody, that's all. I hope to bring you more of these videos in the future because I really enjoy doing them. I appreciate everyone watching. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you've had some fun. Thank you.